Well into my adulthood at this point, the feeling I get from slowly exploring and taking in the empty maps from the dead multiplayer modes of games is still as haunting and eerie as it was when I started. To cut a long story short, in the same way that shopping malls, parks, offices, train stations are all slightly and inexplicably unsettling when they're empty, multiplayer maps, game servers, and other online digital worlds are too, and one of the main reasons for that is because none of them were designed to be. In fact, the opposite. They were designed to hold and be populated by as many people as technically possible, while accommodating extremely fast-paced, bright, loud, and competitive gameplay. So, in lacking both of those things, be that because the game servers were shut down, there's no player base, you have no friends, or that you're just simply curious, they're transformed entirely into what I'd call other games altogether. I will now and forever maintain that if you're ever even remotely interested in this subject though, there's no better place to start than with Call of Duty World at War. It is really, by no stretch, the perfect game for this. The effort, the attention to detail, and the atmosphere they both create will never not blow me away. It's something that, to this day, cannot be found anywhere else. I've spoken a lot about some of the most standout examples here before, but to recap, the echoes of the tortured prisoners on Airfield, the sobbing ghost in the bathrooms of Asylum, the haunted pianos playing themselves off in unseen rooms, the chanting of dead soldiers on Dome, the fact that you can hear Hitler's speech just being openly played through loudspeakers on outskirts, are all just some of the things that stoked an obsession within me. Not the Hitler part. An obsession to find this stuff, to discover all the unnoticed and underappreciated aspects of game levels that I feel we're getting less of nowadays because there's less people like me out there willing to seek them out. It just makes me wonder whether or not they even wanted people to play this game, since running around in Team Deathmatch or even Search and Destroy is almost guaranteed that you're gonna miss this stuff. So then why add it, if not for me to do this? So with that being said, it's interesting to then jump ahead a couple of years to see where it went. What happened to it? Because it changed, basically, and in short, but not necessarily for the worse. They're just really fascinatingly different. It's a tone and vibe completely of its own and that can only really be found here. In this game specifically. It's worth addressing at this point that I know they're all at a base level some flavour and variety of Warzone, so it comes bundled with some expected tragic tone that reeks of death. But unlike a game set during World War II, it doesn't have to be handled with the same level of respect and realism. It can go a bit further. And it does. Depicting an almost apocalyptic parallel to our lives and the world we live in today, consisting of more relatable areas like video shops, cafes, offices, because that was this game's point, to depict a modern world war. A world war involving our world. And the map that comes immediately to mind the moment any of this is mentioned is absolutely Highrise. A bright, reflective, imposing, almost sci-fi sprawling cityscape soaked in this hellish orange glow because of the almost apocalyptic sunset. And on top of it all, there's this faint, eerie outline of a mist just gently rolling through over the top of the map to give you this impression that we're really high up and being battered by a constant wind. Although, to be fair, the soundscape does a good enough job at conveying that entirely on its own. It's a stretch, and I'm not implying that this thought ever existed anywhere other than my own dumb mind, but noticing how all the clocks were only textured to have stopped at 10 past 10, how the sun has seemingly stopped where it is, either at sunrise or sunset, how all the food in the cafe is neatly set out but clearly rotten and decayed. I can't be the only one that sees this and feels this kind of dreary, stagnant atmosphere. It would have been a cool way to convey something creepy like the fact that time has literally stood still in a game where that was the point, but here it's not. It's a multiplayer map in a Call of Duty game. Not to mention the Easter egg on this map being these two hard to reach spots covered in these creepy children's teddy bears. My point is just that playing them this way, slowly exploring everything it has to offer and just letting what you find speak for itself, is a really immersive and engaging experience that you're not gonna get any other way from any other game. Again, the map's gimmick, just being where it is at the very top of what looks like the tallest skyscraper for miles, comes bundled with the vertigo aspect, so if you're not a fan of heights, I can't imagine it's a comfortable place to be anyway. With these views of everything for miles and miles, streetlights, cars, this fully modelled and textured rooftop bar area that you can explore and free spectate, the crane, the helipad, and all of the suspended platforms, it's a very vertical map for something so high up already. Or seemingly. Because it was only recently that I noticed it's not actually the tallest building. I have these memories of exploring this map, an impression that it was so high up that you could see everything, when in fact it's surrounded on all sides by this panorama of even taller buildings off into the distance. Unrealistically taller buildings that don't even look like they could exist, to the point where noticing this really makes this feel like an entirely different game. Almost like the moment you stop, stare and really think about it, it stops even feeling like Modern Warfare 2 at all. But then there's also the interior side to Highrise, half of it being made up of these modern office and commercial buildings, with vacant cubicles, lobbies, elevators, storage rooms, which I feel everyone always forgets about, or at least it seems like it all goes criminally unnoticed. Which is insane. I can't get enough of how unsettlingly still everything is inside in comparison to outside. The gentle hum of the aircon, the big old PC towers whirring away. You'll like walk past printers that are still scanning documents. And something no one has ever noticed because it's such an unnecessary detail is how the lights in the side offices are actually on motion sensors. It's such a cool detail that no one knows about because who has ever actually gone into these things? Because overall it's just that attention to detail that really makes this. I have memories of exploring this game, this map in particular, and leaving it idle in different spots just to hear how different the soundscape is, even when just moving between rooms. One memory specifically where I realised I could actually hear footsteps from the office's lobby area. which was such a big deal to me at the time, I almost can't even begin to describe it. At the end of the day, I know the reason for that is either that the sound department recorded audio from an actual office or just used some stock library, which to some might take a lot of the atmosphere out of the discovery of this. But to me, I can't get enough of this stuff simply because, in the game's world, hearing footsteps in this part of the map doesn't make sense, and so completely transforms its atmosphere from what it was originally intended to be. So it's fascinating then to harshly veer in the completely opposite direction with something like the South Park video game on PS1 and N64. Simply because when we have these conversations, we need to talk a lot about intentions, and honestly, for the first time in my life, I have no clue what this is even trying to be. It isn't South Park for one, that's for sure. I will never understand the need to have made all of these games 3D for some ungodly reason. But regardless, for whatever reason, the game we ended up with just is what it is, and whatever their reasons were, they're now irrelevant because we're just left with the finished product. And it's all the more effective, both for those reasons as well as the source material, being this bright, colourful, loud show, because it collides in the middle to create this almost ironic atmosphere, sarcastic even. The setting is like this animated stage set up for the antics of the show, but being eerily off because where is everyone? The singing, the jokes, the fun. It's a dynamic used in the majority of popular indie horror games nowadays, but it's fascinating to see here because it's almost as if it was stumbled into by the devs by pure accident. But surprisingly, what makes it such a good example to use though is mostly just the fact that so few people have ever actually played this game, let alone with friends in the multiplayer mode. So if you, like me, have ever been morbidly curious enough to try this out for yourself, you would have also almost certainly had the same difficulty I had in finding anyone else to subject themselves to this with you, naturally leading me to have to play the game like this, to find, to my surprise, the exact feelings I go looking for. There are a couple of standout maps for me I want to highlight here for their vibe, yeah, but mostly due entirely to how much they stand out here. And oddly so. I mean, it's been a while since I've watched South Park, but I have seen it all, and Warehouses, I have to say, played a very small part. So from the offset, it's a strange addition, but in exploring them, you're always just subconsciously aware that you're a cartoon character in this cartoony, fun-looking game, exploring this cold, dark, metallic industrial environment, drowned in this dark mist that's only ever broken by these ominous blood-red lighting effects. It so heavily contradicts South Park's look and style, it feels dissonant, like I fell through into a part of the game that no one was supposed to see. Because, for one thing, it's a show made out of paper cutouts. South Park doesn't have fog or any lighting effects at all, for that matter. The fog and view distance in general is probably the most complained about aspect of this game, but what people don't seem to know is that in the multiplayer mode it's essentially twice as dense because they had to render 2 to 4 perspectives, which essentially gives it a more unique look and feel from the single player and offers the multiplayer something, a feel the single player didn't have, obscuring everything off into the distance into these twisted, distorted shapes. Not that there really is anything to distort, because the decoration is so few and thinly spread out that it barely even feels like the map is trying to be what it's supposed to be. Outside of the warehouses, there are a couple of other themes of map that each have their own vibe, none of which though comes close to the toy store level, which I feel needed at least an honourable mention, if not solely for the exact opposite reason of the warehouse, being that this map is legitimately and literally the most overtly terrifying map I think I've ever played. I have no idea what it is, whether it's just me personally, the developer's intentions, modern insight, or what. But the fact is, this place, with its piss yellow backrooms looking floor and walls, lack of doors, windows or any escape, the completely out of scale fever dream that is any of the things expected to be in a toy store, and not to mention the toys themselves being nothing short of terrifying, nightmare-inducing creatures with these sunken black voids for eyes, human skin stretched over them with this thin, wiry hair. In short, I hate it. In a good way. Because this place is all of those things, but while it doesn't necessarily work its way under your skin through your subconscious, like is the point with this video, it's interesting to see an example of a game that messed it up so badly that it isn't even a matter of interpretation. They just clearly did not have the budget, experience, or technology behind them when they set out for this, which is why it tends to be less interesting to look at in comparison to a Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, or Halo, for example, where it's quite literally the exact opposite, in that they had almost all the money and talent in the world, review boards, QA testers, only for it to turn out like this anyway. And speaking of, I have easily by far the weirdest relationship with the Halo franchise than anyone has with anything else that I'm sure of. Because in short, I have played a lot of it. I've beaten 1 all the way through Reach multiple times, and Halo 3 was my only 360 game for like the first year after it launched. And yet, despite that, after hundreds and hundreds of hours, I literally couldn't tell you a single thing about any of them. I know that definitely says a lot more about me than the games, don't get me wrong, but my favourite thing about them, and what has kept me coming back over the years, has always just been how strange, weird, and alien they feel and just generally are. By design, that was obviously the intention, it's just really impressively done to the point where not understanding them has become one of my favourite parts. Because to be honest, they're all pretty much similar and have that as a base, a foundation, but every game adds to it with its own style. But Halo 2, to me at least, has always felt like the darker one. Alright, sure, ODST might be the most visually dark in that you can't see anything, but Halo 2's maps are something else. They don't even feel like they're from Halo at all. Maps that, to this day, when I'm exploring them, will occasionally still catch me off guard, making me jump. More than I'm willing to admit. And what other game's maps can you say that about, much less multiplayer maps? Normally, I try to avoid including any kind of wasteland or overtly apocalyptic map whenever I talk about this, just because it's the point. And while that is the case here with one of my favourite maps, Burial Mounds, there is definitely a lot more going on here than just that. I'm not quite sure how to articulate it exactly, but even when this map is full, it feels empty, or at least that it should be. In concept, it's a graveyard of some kind, but for what? I have no idea. It's full of these bones, skeletons that dot the landscape, creating this skyline of death, silhouettes of jagged, pointed black knives shooting out of the ground at random. They're really visually striking just because the landscape is so otherwise bleak and monotone. The black colour of them against the sand-covered cliffs and dunes create this really eerie landscape that's nothing like you would see anywhere else. But the real magic is in the moment you get close enough to any of them where you realise they're likely not even bones at all. They look way more like a building material or parts of a crashed ship, which is more likely considering the constant rain of comets and meteors crashing, falling into orbit way off into the backdrop. Whether they're ships too or not, I love getting lost in the backgrounds, the scene. There is so much going on for a place so otherwise devoid of life. And in summary, it's all so much more effective just because of that. It's recognizable and well designed to the point that it communicates all of this really well, how hostile and barren a place this is, that it's dead and not suitable for life, while at the same time being strange, mysterious and alien enough that the specifics of why stay a mystery, and you're just left confused and afraid to wander the burial mounds, struggling to even begin to imagine what this place even is. Unless, of course, this is just something super well known in Halo lore and I've just been stupidly ignoring it after all these years. I'm almost certain it's that one, so I usually tend to just go with Terminal. A much better example, one of the best ever in fact, I'd say. By no stretch, one of my favourite multiplayer maps of all time, and for so many reasons. To start with, it's not only simply put a train station, but also a multi-storey indoor car park and large open courtyard. All places, like I've mentioned, that are drenched in this feeling because they're made to contain masses of people. And not just contain, but pass them on through. To keep them moving, a train station and car park is no one's destination, they're only ever used on a person's way to somewhere else. They're areas of transition that lie somewhere in between. I've seen hundreds of places like this throughout my life, and because of that I don't really take them in as much as I maybe should. They sit in my subconscious, my peripheral vision, occupying this strange dreamlike plane in my mind and eliciting all the same feelings when I see them now in this strange digital form. It feels comfortable, familiar, no different to any of the stations and car parks I've been through before, apart from there being no one else here. Every single Halo map, in my experience, does this really well, but there's something about the lighting, the late morning sun coating the sky and map in this washed out pink amber colour, the low shadows, the stillness that comes from the lack of any kind of weather effects. It gives me a feeling that I can only try and begin to explain. It's like I'm late for work or school, or that I'm off sick and everyone has left the house for the day, that everyone is somewhere else and that you should be too. Maybe it sounds dumb, but it's a feeling I love and that can't be found in any other game or in any other way. So as you can probably guess, a game with that strange alien high-tech theme in addition to the uncanny twisted muddy visuals of the 5th generation consoles would probably be the holy grail of dead map exploration. Perfect Dark, it needs to be said before I even get into that though, has hands down easily some of the best environments I have ever seen in a video game in my life to this day. Perfect is right, but it's anything other than Dark, all bright and clean. Every chance they get, they have the sun blasting through a skylight, illuminating the rooms and bouncing off of all the insanely reflective surfaces. I really hate throwing around the word liminal as much as I do, especially considering how overused it is nowadays generally, but the way they've designed all the lobbies and office space areas specifically in this game is magical, if not liminal. I could talk all day about just this aspect alone, except I need to complain first. Something that occurred to me only while making this, and is the case here, was that the majority of games from my childhood when they had a multiplayer mode, in large part they only really ever consisted of these completely walled-in, indoor, maze-like areas that in fact I think can literally just be called labyrinths. By straight definition, and usually in the most unspectacular way possible. I love them, don't get me wrong, they're just very similar. Getting lost in them, the lighting by design requiring them to be all atmospherically lit, the photo-sourced brick and grunge textures, Their unnatural, impossible design looking like a Windows 95 screensaver. There are some exceptions, sure, but for whatever reason, you'll find that it's generally the case with most games from this time, and Perfect Dark is no exception. The map grid, for example, the perfect example of this, really. You can see in its design that the intention was to have it be an office lobby similar to that of the game's hub world, proving that they could do it artistically, but whether it's because of technical limitations or simply decisions that led to this as an intentional design choice, the map is this beautiful hybrid of the dingy, stone-tiled ancient labyrinth, just with all the good stuff that the single player did so well. Glass floors, immaculately clean reflective floors and walls, ceiling lights, modern, cold, high-tech interiors, a working elevator. A combination of things I think literally would not exist if not forced together by the limitations of the medium being a multiplayer map from a multiplayer mode in a primarily single-player game. And it's amazing. There are no windows, entrances, exits. Exploring this place is so far from anything I could even dream, and yet that's the only thing I could ever even compare it to. It's surreal, amazing, and really unsettling. The working lift gives the map life enough that it doesn't feel eerily still, but watching it for long enough, it's hard to convince yourself that there's not all of a sudden going to be someone in it on the way back down. And it does not stop there. Villa, I assume based on the Villa level from Perfect Dark's campaign, works in a similar way to Grid, except differing in not looking anything even remotely comparable to what it's supposed to be at all, or really looking like anything for that matter. It's one of my favourite maps ever, because if it didn't have a title, I legitimately would not be able to tell you what this place even is. I feel like it might all mean a lot more to me personally because it just so happens to look like so many of my dreams. With the bright, blinding sunlight, the Spanish colonial-inspired architecture, the terracotta tiling with the white painted walls, everything just being sun-bleached and faded. Then there's all the stuff that doesn't make sense. Like, what would this place even look like from above? Is it just a brick maze? The square steps down to a single patch of grass. It's like the map is more a palette of shapes and objects that resemble things we can compare them to, but that are smashed together in a state where they don't really resemble anything. Again, you'd have to tell me because I'm not sure how relatable this is, but if it's possible for a person's dreams to have a look, this is mine. My favourite map from the game, however, does both. Perfectly titled CARPARK, the map takes place in what is clearly an abandoned multi-story car park just from what looks like another planet, in another dimension, from a nightmare. It's dark, dingy, looks like some kind of ancient undiscovered temple with the brickwork, open fires and pillars, the ramps, crumbling stone walls. But then there's the lighting off into the stairwells, illuminating them with these emergency lights in varying shades of unnatural colours. Obviously, the point was to give them something they could be immediately identified by, but the reason that was necessary is because there's 4 identical stairwells on each side of the map. So despite being a sci-fi futuristic car park, it's built from stone in perfect symmetry, like a pyramid, temple, or ancient labyrinth, ending up feeling like neither, instead a perfect hybrid of the two, especially when you reach the roof. Which gives you this really eerie view of exactly where you are. Nowhere at all, looking over absolutely nothing at all, in this pitch black void that stretches endlessly off into the horizon. So yeah, the examples are never ending and can be talked about for about as long. And despite loving this stuff more than anyone, even I have to call it somewhere. So as much of a cliche as it is to say, I mean it when I do say that I'm always looking to at least hear about more. And even if you don't personally know of any, then I'd highly recommend just trying this out. All you need is a game, some patience, and optionally, imagination, to turn what is basically a war zone into something entirely different.